Hello everyone and welcome back to Freedom Through Confidence. My name is Ben, and in this video we're going to be talking a little bit about whether or not men should stop being emotional and some of the problems associated with being overly emotional, things like that, because the popular advice for guys is, don't be emotional. Men are supposed to be rational and logical, and you're not supposed to act on emotion and this and that. And I watched a video on this concept recently called Stop Being Emotional, brackets, men. And whilst there was some stuff that I agreed with, there was a lot of things I didn't agree with. And I think that there is value in starting to tell men that instead of, just casting out like a blanket statement like stop being emotional, focus on logic and reasoning and rationality, that we start to encourage other men to actually engage with their emotions and actually understand them. And that's the argument that I want to put out in this video today. Now, normally when I do like a response style video, it's just me kind of being sarcastic about the person making the video. In this case, I do think the guy is given like pretty decent advice most of the time. I don't disagree with literally everything that he says, like I usually do with like the red pillars and MGTOW people that I usually respond to in these types of videos. So we're going to jump into this video, we're going to watch it, and I'm going to give you my thoughts, my prescriptions on why men should just be a little bit more emotional and more in touch with their emotions, and why some of the things he says in this video are wrong.
Fellas, emotional discipline is so important. This is not even for this message is beyond the male gender, but this specifically for the male gender because we are leaders, right? And most leaders should not be governed by their emotions.
Now, the first thing that I would say is that we as men aren't necessarily leaders because that's what we're naturally born to be. That's more out of habit and tradition. And I think that that informs a lot of this ideas around why men shouldn't be emotional. And maybe the idea of men as leaders isn't something that we should really take for granted. It's something that we should explore a little bit more. But as it relates to this video, we're going to talk about it throughout the course of it.
Just imagine a person who was flying a freaking plane, right? And they said, today I don't feel like landing properly. I don't feel like I should make this right turn. And then you F everything up and everybody gets hurt.
But I would argue that that's not really to do with emotions at all. Just because you feel like making a right turn instead of a left, like that's not an emotional decision, or at least it's not necessarily an emotional decision. That's just a bad decision. That's a poor or a misinformed decision, but it's not necessarily due to emotions. Also, this isn't something that really happens, you're driving along, you see that your turning is on the right, you gotta go down there, that's where your house is, and then, your emotions just pop out like angel on your shoulder and say, actually, today we should let's try and see if our house is the other way. Like that's not something that happens. It's a silly example, but I can kind of probably forgive the fact that it's not something that was massively thought through. So let's just move on.
You need to control your emotions. Sometimes it's not that people are hurting you, you're probably hurting people and hurting yourself because you're not controlling your emotions.
And this is the point where we agree. Yes, true. Emotional discipline is super, super important. If our emotions run out of control, then they can take over our lives and they can ruin it in any number of ways. You think about things like, if you lose control of your anger, that can cause a whole lot of problems. So I would agree with this point. Emotional discipline is very, very important, especially for men.
But emotional discipline is so important because our emotions, they could either be used for good or bad. Some people who are advanced in an aspect have the power to transmutate their energy and transmutate their emotions into art. Some people could turn that anger into profit, into creativity.
And again, this is something that I totally agree with, and it's an inconsistency with arguments like this where guys are told, you shouldn't be emotional because being emotional is bad. But he's made the point in this video already that the proper application of your emotions, understanding them and channeling them in the right way, can create beauty, it can create art, it can create passion, it can create profit. And that's what we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on emotional discipline rather than emotional nullification, which is what a lot of people call for.
And even that is it's cool, but you don't want to spread anger. I think we should learn how to turn our anger into something positive. For example, when you're mad, go to the gym.
And here is where I would disagree. Sometimes you do have to spread anger. If you look at what happened last year with George Floyd in the States, that only got to the level that it was, and it only got the result that it eventually did, with the guy going to prison for a very, very long time for manslaughter and for just being a bit of a piece of crap. That only got to the stage that it did because of millions, tens of millions of people's collective anger about that injustice. Sometimes emotions do need to get out there, and sometimes you do want to infect people with emotions like anger or with love or with purpose, whatever it is, with drive, with passion. These are good things under the right circumstances, and this is why we shouldn't just throw a blanket statement over it like stop being emotional.
I think we should learn how to turn our anger into something positive. For example, when you're mad, go to the gym. I remember somebody pissed me off. When you work out when you're angry, you just go hard. Like there's nothing that can stop you. And back to the story, I remember somebody was pissing me off, right? And I was just like, man, I'm gonna do these push-ups. And I actually broke the amount of push-ups that I did previously when I was angry.
And again, this is good. This is showing how the proper application of your emotional energy can create positive and amazing outcomes. I've had very similar experiences where I've been very, very angry and gone to the gym, and I've been able to work out for ages without getting tired. I've been able to beat personal bests, all because I have got that controlled rage that I have been able to transmute into actual physical energy. This isn't some esoteric or spiritual thing. This is something, that is probably biochemical in nature, maybe something to do with like adrenaline or testosterone. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I can't explain these things. I'm not smart enough.
That is a form of emotional discipline. Instead of you breaking shit, trying to find something to cut yourself, trying to cut somebody else, trying to do all types of stuff.
Again, yes, I totally agree with this sentiment. Speaking as someone who did suffer from a lot of self-loathing and self-hatred and resulting self-harm, you have to find a way to channel emotions like sadness and grief and anger in appropriate ways. You can't just lash out at someone or lash out at yourself. And I was only able to overcome these things in my life when I started to understand what I was feeling and why I was feeling that way. I didn't get that way by becoming the perfect stoic. I'm probably more emotional now than I ever have been in my life, and I'm more in control and more happy and more energetic and more productive and more everything than I have been ever in my life, because I'm more in touch with my emotions, because I understand them, because I have emotionally educated myself.
When somebody makes a slick comment to you and you actually are in a position to be great, you can't be governed by your emotions. Let the small-minded people be governed by their emotions. Successful people, if you notice, they're not as emotional as, unsuccessful people.
Now, I'm not necessarily sure how true that statement is, and it kind of just seems like the positions that you have available to you is you're either a small-minded individual who is too emotional, or you're a big-brained, successful intellectual who has basically nullified his emotions, that you don't act emotionally. And speaking as a perfectly average guy, there's always a case to be made for mediocrity, guys. You know, you don't have to either be relegated to being a small-minded fool or having to constantly work to becoming like the top 1%. But again, that's a topic for another time. Well, this is different. You might notice that I'm wearing a completely different set of clothes. It's because something like came up randomly and I had to stop filming. So let's jump right back into the topic.
There were certain things that got me off track, certain things and certain actions of others that made me want to sit back and try to be emotional about it. It's not worth it. It's never worth it.
Okay, so again, I have to disagree with this. So there was a time when I was in university that I went out drinking with one of my friends and her boyfriend. And as we started heading home, he was angry for some reason and he started to physically attack her. And this made me angry and I put the guy down. And this to me is a positive application of my emotions at that time. Even though anger is something that is often seen as a very negative emotion, I feel like it was justified in its use and I controlled it. I controlled it enough to not hurt the guy, just to put him on the floor and out of commission. So I would disagree with the statement that, you know, acting out of emotion is not worth it, or as he says, is never worth it, because we don't just have to apply it to that kind of situation. What about the decision to ask someone to marry you? That's a very emotional decision to make. That's not something that people kind of come to logically now. Perhaps it was in the past when there was like more arranged marriages and things like that, but nowadays most people marry each other because they love each other. So that's not a logical decision, that's an emotional decision. What about giving up one of your organs to a loved one? Logically speaking, that's a pretty stupid thing to do because, you know, you should want yourself to be in perfect health. But if you love someone that much, or if you care for someone that much, then you're not really going to probably think twice about it. If your mate needs one of your kidneys, you'll be like, oh, look, I've got two, take one of mine. And, you know, that's what you would do. So I don't think it is the case that it's never worth it to act out of emotion.
Because as a man, you know, you got to lead with your mind as well. You see, a lot of women are governed by their heart. And that's okay, that's their natural instinct. But the powerful minded person is gonna lead with their mind.
Okay, so this guy has been pretty genuine throughout the course of this video so far, so I don't just want to lump him in with the usual kind of POS people that I respond to on this channel. So I'll kind of set the statement aside. But this just isn't true. It's not that men aren't more emotional than women. Men and women have literally the same amount of emotions. It's not like we have like a percentage lower or women have like a percentage higher. Like, it's not the case. It's just that men are socialized away from expressing their emotions or dealing with them in an appropriate way. And the problem is we think that this makes us logical and rational, and in fact it's not that simple, because most of the time the decisions that we make are emotional decisions that we then rationalize after. We're not rational beings, we're rationalizing beings. So there's this story of a man that was in a Harvard case study, perfectly normal man, lived a pretty successful life, wife and kids, had everything going for him until he developed a brain tumor in his brain. And once that was kind of cut out and there was a little bit of brain damage, that stopped him from feeling emotions. Now, on the surface, he was a perfectly normal guy, but he completely lost the ability to make any kind of decision, no matter how big or how small, because he couldn't feel it anymore. So like the decisions, they didn't actually matter to him. So he just ended up not really doing anything with his life. And it's actually a really, really sad story, but it underlines the importance of emotions in our decision-making process. We feel what is the right thing to do first, and then we create a rationalization after it.
In the Bible, it says the heart is deceitful amongst many things, which is crazy. So if your emotions are deceitful, why would you lead with them?
Because emotions aren't purely deceitful. Yes, our emotions can deceive us. That's a thing that happens. but it's not what they only do. Most of the times, emotions inform us, or they give our lives meaning and color and richness. And there's something to be said for working on understanding your emotions and gaining that emotional experience that you can know when your emotions are being deceitful, but you don't get that level of emotional awareness, emotional intelligence by just stopping being emotional or just trying to ignore what emotions are going on in your mind and trying to focus on being purely logical and rational. Like, that's not the way that that works.
That's probably the reason why a lot of women probably look down on men. Maybe they was too emotional and they hurt the woman, you know? You guys got to stop doing that crap too. Stop beating on your chick, bro. That's not the way you get your point across, bro. Study some game, and then you could abstain from bringing her pain. You know what I'm saying?
Spoken word poetry aside, yeah, that's a perfectly reasonable statement on emotional control when it comes to men.
Use your head, not your heart. The impact you have when you use your head will serve you generations more than you using your heart.
With this, I just don't see it. When I think of people in the world who have been highly influential, I think of people like Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi or Malala Yousafzai, whose name I have really probably messed up there. These weren't people that acted like out of logic and kind of rationality, because logic and rationality at those times would have been to keep your head down, stay alive. Instead, they took the kind of social and political action that they did because they felt it in their hearts that it was the right thing to do. 2 of them were killed for it, and 1 of them was almost killed. Logic and rationality says that if they had just kept their heads down, they probably would have been unharmed, more or less. And so yes, there is still, as I keep saying, a case for emotional intelligence. But when we're talking about making impacts in your life or on the world, this isn't a purely rational process. This is an emotional process. This is something that you need to tap into a certain level of emotionality to influence people or to persuade people or to bring about outcomes in the world or in your life that are positive.
You gotta govern your emotions, stop being emotional, practice emotional discipline, and just be great.
So really, to sum up what I agree with in this video and what I don't agree with, I agree that especially amongst men, emotional discipline is so important. We have been socialized for most of our lives to not really engage with our emotions, and that means that when we do get emotional, we have a tendency to act in ways that aren't particularly emotionally mature. Now, yes, one solution to that is to stop being emotional altogether, kind of in the same way that one of the most effective ways to cure cancer is simply to kill the cancer patient. Like, yeah, it'll stop the cancer from growing and metastasizing further, but the person's also dead. And so getting rid of your emotions or just trying to lock them down or ignore your emotions is pretty much the same thing. What I'm advocating for is for men to start to engage with their emotions in a constructive way, which is one of the things that he actually brings up in the video. You know, if you're angry, go to the gym. That's like a constructive way that you could use your anger. The answer isn't just to eliminate emotions. It is to listen to them, to understand them, to use our emotions to connect with ourselves and with others in the world, and to make the changes that we want to make in our lives and in the world. And that's my point. That's what I am advocating for with men, for men to understand their emotions so that the emotions don't govern their lives. But at the same time, they have access to enough emotions to make your life better. And really, that's all I've got to say for this video today. So thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos here on this channel very soon.